My younger sister Emily had always known how to own a room. The moment she walked into any space, people noticed her. The perfect smile, the designer dresses, the confidence that made everyone believe she belonged somewhere important. Growing up, my father treated her like she was sunlight itself. Everything Emily did was brilliant. Everything Emily wanted mattered. And me, I was simply Rachel, the older daughter who stayed quiet, worked hard, and somehow always became invisible whenever Emily entered the room. By the time we reached adulthood, the favoritism wasn't even subtle anymore. When Emily graduated college, my father threw her a huge celebration and invited half the city. When I finished nursing school while working double shifts, he sent me a short text message that simply read, "Congrats." I told myself it didn't hurt anymore. But some wounds never really heal, they just become quieter. So when Emily announced she was marrying Daniel Carter, a successful corporate attorney from a wealthy family, my father acted like the royal wedding had arrived in our small town. He bragged about it constantly to neighbors, coworkers, even strangers at grocery stores. "My daughter is marrying a millionaire," he said proudly every chance he got. Not my daughters, just daughter Emily. The wedding became his entire world for almost a year. Expensive flowers, crystal chandeliers, a luxury ballroom downtown that cost more than I made in 6 months. Every detail had to be perfect because Emily refused to accept anything less. 3 months before the wedding, she called me crying late at night. "Dad can't afford the final venue payment," she sobbed. "If we lose the ballroom, Daniel's family will think we're pathetic." I should have said no. God knows I should have. But despite everything Emily had done to me over the years, she was still my little sister. Somewhere deep down, I still remembered the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. So I sold my car, the car I spent 4 years paying off. I started taking buses to work at the hospital and transferred nearly all the money to Emily secretly. She begged me not to tell Dad because she didn't want him feeling embarrassed. "You're saving my wedding," she whispered emotionally over the phone. I'll never forget this. But people like Emily always forgot kindness once they no longer needed it. On the day of the wedding, I arrived alone wearing the only formal dress I could afford. The ballroom was breathtaking, white roses hanging from golden arches, soft violin music floating through the air, giant crystal chandeliers glowing above hundreds of perfectly dressed guests. I suddenly felt painfully out of place. Most people barely acknowledged me. A few relatives gave awkward smiles before returning to conversations. My assigned seat sat near the back corner, beside strangers from Daniel's extended family. Meanwhile, Emily floated through the ballroom like a queen. My father couldn't stop smiling beside her. I watched him fix her veil gently before the ceremony started, his eyes full of pride and love. For one painful second, I wondered what it must feel like to be looked at that way by your own parent. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Daniel looked genuinely in love with her. Honest, kind, completely unaware of the kind of person Emily could become when attention wasn't fully on her. At the reception, laughter and music filled the ballroom. Waiters carried expensive champagne between tables while guests danced beneath sparkling lights. Then came the speeches. My father stood first, talking about how Emily was the greatest joy of his life. The guests applauded while Emily wiped fake tears carefully to protect her makeup. Then Emily herself took the microphone. At first, she thanked everyone politely, Daniel, the guests, our parents, and then her eyes landed on me. A slow smile spread across her face. "I also want to thank my sister Rachel," she said loudly, "because growing up with her taught me exactly what kind of life I never wanted." The room fell silent. I felt my stomach tighten instantly. Emily laughed softly into the microphone. Seriously, if I hadn't watched every bad decision she made, I might never have worked this hard to become successful. Several guests laughed nervously. Then Emily kept going. She joked about my divorce, my financial struggles, my long hospital shifts, even the fact that my ex-husband left me when the medical debt became too overwhelming. Every cruel sentence hit harder than the last, and when I finally looked toward my father for help, he was laughing harder than anyone else in the room. The sound of my father's laughter hurt more than Emily's words. I could survive humiliation from strangers. I had survived worse things in life: divorce, debt, exhaustion, loneliness. But hearing my own father laugh while his youngest daughter destroyed me publicly felt like someone had reached into my chest and crushed something fragile with their bare hands. Around the ballroom, guests exchanged uncomfortable looks while others continued chuckling politely, unsure whether this was some twisted family joke. Emily stood confidently at the center of the dance floor, holding her champagne glass like she had just delivered the greatest speech of the night. And honestly, she continued with a dramatic sigh, Rachel deserves credit for inspiring me to never settle. Every family needs at least one example of what failure looks like. A few louder laughs echoed through the room. I couldn't breathe. My face burned with humiliation as tears threatened to spill down my cheeks. I refused to cry in front of 200 people. Emily would enjoy that too much, so I quietly pushed my chair back. The scraping sound against the marble floor caught several people's attention. Conversations softened as I grabbed my purse with trembling hands. I only wanted one thing: to leave. But before I could take more than 2 steps, another chair suddenly moved. Daniel stood up. The groom's expression had completely changed. Gone was the smiling man who had danced with Emily minutes earlier. His jaw looked tight, his eyes colder than I had ever seen before. "Emily," he said calmly, "what exactly are you doing?" She blinked in confusion before laughing awkwardly. "Relax, babe, I'm just teasing her." "No," Daniel replied, "you're humiliating her." The room went silent instantly. Emily lowered the microphone slightly. "It's family humor." Daniel looked directly at me standing near the exit. Then he turned slowly toward the guests. "Humor is supposed to make people laugh together," he said firmly, "not isolate one person while everyone else watches." Nobody moved. Nobody even picked up their glasses. For the first time that evening, the ballroom felt painfully awake. My father cleared his throat loudly and waved a dismissive hand. "Rachel's always been overly emotional," he said. "Don't take this too seriously, son." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Overly emotional," he repeated quietly. "Your daughter was insulted in front of 200 guests while her own family applauded." Emily forced another laugh, but I could hear nervousness creeping into her voice now. "Daniel, come on. You're making this awkward." "No," he answered. "You made it awkward the moment you decided cruelty was entertainment." A heavy silence settled over the ballroom. Then Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out his phone. My stomach tightened again, confused. Emily's face suddenly lost color. "Daniel," she whispered carefully. "He ignored her for months." He said loudly enough for the guests to hear, "I've received anonymous messages warning me about Emily." Murmurs spread instantly across the tables. My father frowned. "What are you talking about?" "At first, I thought someone was jealous," Daniel continued. "But yesterday, I hired a private investigator because too many things stopped making sense." Emily stepped toward him quickly. "Please stop." But Daniel moved away from her. The guests stared at them, like they were watching the wedding collapse in real time. The investigator found something interesting. Daniel said coldly, Emily told everyone her family sacrificed so much to make this wedding happen. She's our daughter. My father snapped defensively. Of course we helped. Daniel slowly looked toward me, but the person who sacrificed the most wasn't you. My heartbeat stopped. He raised his phone higher. Rachel sold her car 6 months ago and transferred nearly every dollar to Emily, so this venue wouldn't be cancelled. Gasps exploded across the ballroom. My father's face turned white. What? He whispered. Emily's breathing became shaky. It wasn't supposed to. Daniel cut her off immediately. She took money from the sister she constantly mocks, he said, then spent months telling people Rachel was jealous, bitter, and unsuccessful. I lowered my eyes as whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Some guests looked horrified. Others looked embarrassed for laughing earlier. My father slowly turned toward me. For the first time all night, he truly looked at me. Rachel, he said weakly. Is that true? I didn't answer, because the truth was already destroying everything. Daniel removed his wedding ring slowly and placed it on the table beside his untouched champagne glass. The tiny sound of metal hitting glass echoed through the silent ballroom. Emily stared at the ring in complete panic. Daniel, she whispered desperately, you can't be serious. But the look on his face terrified everyone, especially her. The ballroom felt frozen in time. Nobody spoke after Daniel placed the wedding ring on the table. The violin music had already stopped, and even the waiters stood motionless near the walls, staring at the disaster unfolding in front of them. Emily's mascara-stained face twisted in panic as she grabbed Daniel's arm. Please don't do this, she whispered desperately. Not here. Daniel gently pulled away from her touch. You should have thought about that before humiliating your own sister in front of everyone, he replied. My father finally stepped forward, his face pale with shock. Son, calm down, he said quickly. Every family has problems. Emily was only joking. Daniel looked at him with disbelief. Do you honestly still think this is a joke? My father opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out, because deep down, even he knew what happened tonight crossed every line. Emily suddenly pointed at me with trembling hands. Why is everyone acting like I'm some monster? Rachel always plays the victim. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, but Daniel didn't even look at her anymore. Instead, he looked at me. Did you really sell your car to help pay for this wedding? He asked softly. The entire room waited for my answer. I hated that every eye in the ballroom suddenly carried pity. I never wanted pity. I only wanted basic kindness from the people who were supposed to love me. Finally, I nodded once. Yes, a wave of whispers spread instantly through the crowd. My father stared at me like he didn't recognize the daughter standing in front of him. You sold your car, he repeated weakly. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my shaking voice. Emily called me crying. I admitted. She said the venue payment was short, and she was terrified Daniel's family would think less of us. Emily covered her face in embarrassment. She begged me not to tell anyone because she didn't want you feeling guilty. I continued while looking directly at my father. So I helped. My father's eyes slowly filled with tears. For years, I had imagined this moment differently. I imagined screaming at him, making him finally understand how deeply his favoritism hurt me. But standing there now, I only felt exhausted. Years of trying to earn love had drained everything out of me. She worked extra hospital shifts. Daniel added quietly. The investigator found records showing she picked up nearly every overnight shift available for 2 months. Several women near the front tables looked horrified. One older guest muttered, and they laughed at her. The shame inside the ballroom became unbearable. Emily suddenly exploded emotionally. "Oh my God, stop acting like she's some saint," she shouted. "She chose to help me." I stared at her in disbelief. Even now, she couldn't apologize. Even now, everything had to revolve around her. Daniel shook his head slowly. "That's exactly the problem," he said. "Your sister showed you love, and you treated her like a joke." Emily's breathing became uneven as tears streamed down her face. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under," she cried. "Everything had to be perfect. And humiliating Rachel made you feel powerful," Daniel asked coldly. She said nothing, because there was no defense left. Then, unexpectedly, my mother stood up from her chair near the back of the ballroom. Her hands trembled as she looked toward me. "I knew Rachel helped financially," she admitted softly. "But I didn't know she sold her car." My father turned toward her in shock. "You knew." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "She begged me not to tell you," Mom whispered. "She said she didn't want more problems in the family." My father suddenly looked completely broken. For the first time in my life, he seemed to realize how much pain I had hidden quietly for years. He looked back at me with guilt written across his face. "Rachel," he whispered painfully. But before he could say anything else, another voice interrupted from across the room. Daniel's mother stood gracefully beside her table, her expression sharp with disappointment. "I raised my son to recognize character," she said firmly. "And tonight, the only person in this room who showed true character was Rachel." The room fell silent again. Emily looked shattered. The perfect wedding she spent a year building was collapsing piece by piece in front of everyone she wanted to impress. Then Daniel took a deep breath and spoke the words that destroyed everything completely. "I can't marry someone capable of this kind of cruelty." The moment Daniel said he couldn't marry her, the ballroom erupted into chaos. Emily grabbed the front of his tuxedo jacket with trembling hands. "Please," she cried, "you're overreacting." But Daniel carefully removed her hands from him. "No," he said quietly, "I'm finally reacting correctly." The silence that followed felt heavier than screaming. Around the ballroom, guests began whispering openly now. Some avoided eye contact with my family altogether, embarrassed they had laughed during Emily's speech earlier. Others stared at her with open disgust. My father stood completely frozen near the dance floor. The same man who laughed at me only minutes ago now looked like he had aged 10 years in a single night. Emily turned desperately toward him. "Dad, say something." But for once he had nothing to say, because there was nothing left to defend. I slowly picked up my purse again, no longer shaking this time. The humiliation still hurt deeply, but something strange had replaced part of the pain. Relief, the truth was finally out. No more pretending. No more swallowing insults to keep peace in the family. No more shrinking myself so Emily could shine brighter. As I walked toward the ballroom exit, people moved aside quietly to let me pass. Some guests even looked ashamed when our eyes met. Then I heard footsteps rushing behind me. Rachel. It was my father. I stopped near the Grand Hotel entrance, but didn't turn around immediately. Outside the glass doors, rain poured heavily across the city streets, turning the lights blurry and soft. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then his voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" I laughed bitterly under my breath. The question hurt more than he realized. Slowly, I turned to face him. "Would you have believed me?" I asked quietly. His eyes filled instantly with tears because we both knew the answer. No. For years, Emily's words mattered more than mine. Whenever we argued, he automatically defended her. Whenever she mocked me, he called it harmless teasing. Whenever I pulled away hurt, he accused me of being dramatic. He never asked why. He never looked deeper. Because it was easier to love the daughter who made him proud publicly than the daughter who quietly carried everyone's burdens. My father lowered his head in shame. "I failed you," he whispered. Those 3 words broke something inside me completely. Not because they hurt, but because I had waited my entire life to hear them. Tears finally slipped down my cheeks, but this time I didn't hide them. "I spent years trying to earn your approval," I admitted softly, "and tonight, when she humiliated me, you laughed." He covered his mouth as if the memory physically sickened him now. "I know," he said painfully. "God, Rachel, I know." Behind us, the ballroom doors suddenly burst open. Emily stumbled outside crying hysterically, her expensive makeup ruined by tears. "Daniel's leaving," she shouted. "He's actually leaving me." For a brief moment, I looked at my little sister, the same girl I once protected from bullies at school, the same girl whose nightmares I comforted during storms. But somewhere along the way, Emily learned that being adored mattered more than being kind, and now she was finally facing the consequences. She reached toward me desperately. "Rachel, please help me fix this." I stared at her quietly. All my life, I had rescued Emily from problems she created herself. I defended her, protected her, sacrificed for her, and every single time, she hurt me anyway. So for the first time in my life, I chose myself. "No," I said calmly. Her face crumbled in disbelief. "You embarrassed me publicly because you thought I would stay silent." I continued. "You never imagined someone would finally see the truth." My father closed his eyes in shame beside us. Rain thundered against the hotel windows as guests slowly began leaving the ruined wedding behind. Emily collapsed onto a nearby chair, sobbing uncontrollably, while phone cameras flashed quietly in the distance. By morning, videos from the reception would spread online everywhere. People would watch the bride humiliate her sister, then watch the groom walk away. But as I stepped outside into the cold rain, something inside me finally felt free, because revenge wasn't ruining Emily's wedding. Revenge was surviving long enough for the truth to destroy every lie she built her life on. And in the end, the daughter they mocked walked away with dignity, while the golden child lost everything in front of 200 guests.